In late January 2026, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses made a quiet announcement. Not a press release, not a public statement. A quiet internal update distributed to members around the world. Kenneth Cook Jr., a sitting member of the governing body itself, revealed that Bible teachers within the organization can now skip entire lessons from their main study book when conducting studies with potential converts. Not summarize them, not condense them, skip them entirely. Sit with that for a moment. This is a religious organization that has spent over a century telling the world that accurate knowledge is literally the difference between life and death. That understanding their doctrine, specifically their doctrine, no other will do, is the only path to surviving Armageddon, the only path to seeing your children grow up in a paradise earth, the only path to anything that matters. And in the first month of 2026, with nobody watching, they quietly told their publishers, their foot soldiers, their door-to-door representatives, cut the corners, skip the lessons, get them to the water faster. The question is not whether this happened. It did. The question is why. And the answer to that question is something the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses would very much prefer you never figure out. Because when you combine this January announcement with what appeared in the February 2026 edition of the official Watchtower Study magazine, the one opened and read aloud in kingdom halls around the world at the very start of this year, a picture forms. And it is not the picture of a religious organization growing in spiritual confidence. It is the picture of an institution that is afraid. An institution that is losing a race it cannot admit it is running. An institution that has quietly decided the only way to survive what is coming is to get as many people as possible locked in before the door closes. Today, we go inside these documents. We read the words they published. We follow the logic they laid out. And we ask the question they hoped nobody would ask. If your doctrine is the truth, why are you so desperate to baptize people before they have time to learn it? To understand what is really happening in 2026, you have to understand something that the organization has always been very careful to keep quiet from newcomers. Baptism among Jehovah's Witnesses is not what it is anywhere else. Most people who encounter a witness at their door assume they are talking to someone from a Christian denomination. Unusual perhaps, but Christian. And in most Christian traditions, baptism is a public declaration of personal faith, meaningful, sacred, but private in its consequences. If you get baptized in a Baptist church and 10 years later decide you no longer believe, you leave. Your family does not disappear. Your phone still rings. Your name still exists to the people who loved you. Jehovah's Witnesses do not have a version of that story. The moment a person is submerged in that water at a witness assembly or convention, something happens that has nothing to do with God and everything to do with institutional control. That person has entered into a binding social contract. Some legal experts have argued it functions as a binding contract in the most literal sense, with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And the terms of that contract are never fully disclosed before it is signed. From the moment of baptism forward, if that person is ever found to have violated the organization's rules, and the list of rules is long, and the enforcement is serious, and the violations can include things as ordinary as celebrating a birthday or attending a relative's wedding in a church, they can be formally disfellowshipped. Disfellowshipping is not expulsion. It is not excommunication in the way most people understand that word. It is the organized, deliberate, socially enforced erasure of a human being from their entire community. Every witness they know, family, friends, neighbors, the people they grew up with, the people who sat beside them at meetings for decades, every single one of those people is instructed to cut contact, completely, to not answer their calls, to not return their messages, to walk past them on the street without acknowledgement, to treat them, in the language used in Watchtower publications, as if they are spiritually dead. Parents do this to their children. Children do this to their parents. Husbands and wives have separated because one was disfellowshipped and the other was told by elders that maintaining the marriage in any meaningful way would put their own standing in jeopardy. People have sat alone in hospitals. People have buried parents at funerals where their own siblings would not sit in the same row. People have lived for years, some for the rest of their lives, in a silence that was not chosen but imposed, because they asked a question, or found an inconsistency, or simply could not keep performing a belief they no longer held. This is the trap. This is what is waiting behind the door of baptism. And the most important thing to understand about the trap is this. You cannot fall into it unless you walk through that door first. For most of the organization's modern history, getting to that door took time, real time, months, often more than a year. The process looked like thoroughness. It looked like the kind of institutional seriousness that an organization would maintain if it genuinely believed what it was teaching was eternally important. Candidates for baptism studied books like Knowledge That Leads to Everlasting Life, and later What Does the Bible Really Teach? Page by page, lesson by lesson, question by question. Before a congregation's elders would even begin the formal baptism review, every chapter had to be completed. The formal review itself was a multi-session interview process covering dozens of doctrinal questions, designed to confirm that the candidate truly understood and truly accepted what they were committing to. But here is what the organization never advertised about that process. Every month a person spent in pre-baptism study was not just a month of doctrinal instruction, it was a month of social integration. A month during which the person's entire relational world was quietly being rebuilt inside the congregation. New friends, new routines, new community, new identity. By the time the study was complete and the baptism questions were answered, and the person stepped into the water, the trap had already been constructed around them, brick by brick, meeting by meeting, dinner invitation by dinner invitation. The water was not the beginning of the trap. The water was the lock on the door. That is why the implicit promise of the long study process was always, at least in part, a performance. The years of careful study were not primarily about producing theologically prepared disciples. They were about producing people who had spent enough time inside the organization's social world that leaving had already become psychologically costly before they ever formally committed. The doctrine was the surface. The social architecture was the point, and January 2026 exposed that performance completely. When Kenneth Cook Jr. announced that publishers can now skip entire lessons from the current study book, Enjoy Life Forever, the organization did not just change a policy. It revealed something it had never intended to say out loud. If the doctrinal content of those lessons were truly the point, skipping them would be unthinkable. You do not skip lessons in a process you claim is preparation for eternal life. You do not tell your teachers to omit material you have declared essential to salvation, unless the material was never actually the point, unless what mattered was getting the person committed, and the study was just the mechanism for doing it. And then in February 2026, with the January announcement barely 2 weeks old, the Watchtower published the companion piece that makes the strategy impossible to misread. The February 2026 Watchtower Study Edition is, at its core, a pressure campaign. 2 articles form its center. Keep working toward baptism and understanding the meaning of baptism. They are written in the warm, reassuring tone the organization has always used to deliver its most coercive instructions. But read carefully, read paragraph 2 of that first article, and the coercion is impossible to miss. The target of that paragraph is a specific kind of person, someone who has been hesitating, someone who has reservations, someone who feels in their gut that they are not ready yet, someone whose instincts are telling them to wait. And what the governing body says to that person, in print, in the official study material used in congregations on every continent, is this: your hesitation is a spiritual problem. Your sense of not being ready is something to overcome, not something to honor. Stop delaying. The time for waiting is over. Get baptized now. Think about what that instruction is actually doing. It is taking the one protection that a person in that situation has, their own uncertainty, their own internal signal that something is unresolved, and redefining it as a weakness to be defeated. It is telling a person that the voice inside them saying, "Wait, I have questions," is not wisdom. It is fear. It is spiritual immaturity. And the cure is not more information. The cure is commitment. The cure is the water. Researchers who study high-control groups have a name for this maneuver. It is called thought stopping. The technique does not silence doubt by answering it. It silences doubt by training the doubter to be ashamed of doubting. And once a person has been taught to treat their own rational hesitation as evidence of spiritual failure, they have lost the most important tool they had for protecting themselves. So why 2026? Why is this happening now, with this particular combination of accelerated education and emotional baptism pressure, at this specific moment in history? The answer requires understanding what the last several years have looked like from inside the Watchtower's executive offices. Because from inside those offices, the view has been increasingly alarming. In Norway, after years of legal proceedings, the government stripped the Jehovah's Witnesses of state religious funding. The basis for that decision included the disfellowshipping policy itself. A court system looked at the shunning mechanism and found it incompatible with fundamental human rights protections. The case was not a footnote. It was covered internationally. It placed the organization's most coercive tool under a legal and media spotlight it had never faced at that level before. At the same time, a wave of child sexual abuse litigation across the United States, Australia, and multiple European countries had been generating court documents and legal settlements for years. Internal Watchtower correspondence, forced into public record through discovery processes, showed a pattern that legal experts described as institutional protection of abusers over protection of children. These cases became newspaper investigations. They became documentary films. They became the kind of search results that appear on the first page when someone curious about Jehovah's Witnesses opens a browser for the very first time. And that browser is the crisis. Not the court cases themselves, not the Norway ruling in isolation. The crisis is the information that is now sitting one search away from every person who ever opens a door to a witness or accepts an invitation to a Bible study. The crisis is that the window between first contact and the moment a person types the organization's name into a search engine is now measured in days, not decades. Every additional month a Bible student spends studying before getting baptized is another month in which the algorithm might surface something the organization cannot answer. Another month in which a family member sends a link. Another month in which a coworker mentions something they read. Another month in which a video from a former member finds its way onto a screen and a real human face appears. And a real human being describes in plain language what the disfellowshipping policy cost them, in language that no Watchtower article has ever been able to neutralize. The governing body has watched the correlation between study duration and non-baptism grow year over year. They understand the mathematics, and their response in 2026 is to change the mathematics. Skip the lessons that generate questions. Apply emotional pressure to override the hesitation that incomplete information naturally produces. Close the window before it becomes an opening. Because here is the reality that lives behind all of this. The reality the organization cannot afford to let a Bible student discover before the baptism happens. Before baptism, if a person decides the organization is not for them, they walk away. There is real loss in that, of friendships formed during the study, of the warmth of the congregation, of the sense of community the organization is genuinely skilled at providing. That loss matters. But the person walks away intact. Their identity remains their own. Their family outside the organization remains. The people they loved before they started studying still know their name. After baptism, the architecture is different in every way that matters. Consider someone who got baptized at 22 after a year of study before they ever thought to search for what former members had to say. Imagine they spent the next 15 years building their entire life inside the organization. Their closest friends are witnesses. Their spouse is a witness. Their parents, who were already members, wept at the baptism with genuine joy. Every birthday not celebrated, every holiday declined, every secular friendship that quietly faded because the hours required for meetings and field service left no room for it, all of it was given to this community. This is their world. There is no other world anymore. Now imagine they are 37 years old, and a question surfaces that they cannot make go away. Maybe they read something online. Maybe a judicial committee meeting reveals an elder saying something that cannot be unsaid. Maybe the abuse litigation reaches a congregation they know personally. And slowly, over months or years of private anguish, they arrive at the realization that they no longer believe what they were baptized into. If they are quiet enough, they can try to fade. But if they are noticed, or if they speak to the wrong person, or if their changed beliefs ever become visible in any way, the machinery activates. A judicial committee convenes. A decision is made. And on a Sunday morning, from the platform of the Kingdom Hall where they have sat for 15 years, an elder reads a brief announcement. The congregation is informed that this person is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Within days, sometimes within hours, the silence begins. Friends of 15 years stop responding. The spouse still inside the organization faces pressure from elders about what continued closeness would mean for their own standing. Their children, if the children are still members, are navigating a guidance system that places loyalty to Jehovah above loyalty to a parent who has been spiritually condemned. Their elderly parents are told by elders how to manage the relationship, and manage means reduce. And reduce means until the person sitting across from you at a table is a stranger wearing the face of someone you raised. That person did not commit a crime. They did not harm anyone. They changed their mind, and for that they lost everyone. That is what the 2026 baptism rush is actually about. Not spiritual urgency, not a theological response to the nearness of Armageddon. The urgency in Kenneth Cook's January announcement and in the February Watchtower is the urgency of an institution trying to set a trap before the person walking toward it can read the sign on the door. In any other institutional context, we have names for what happens when an organization recruits people into a binding arrangement without disclosing its real terms. We call it predatory. We say that an agreement made without informed consent, under manufactured emotional pressure, based on deliberately withheld information, cannot be morally valid. That the people who designed that agreement carry responsibility for the harm it produces. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses are not unintelligent men. They have teams of lawyers who have spent years in courtrooms defending the disfellowshipping policy. They have read the Norway decision. They have seen the abuse litigation documents. They know what is in those search results, because those results now include their own internal correspondence. They know the information cannot be made to disappear. So they have made a different calculation. If the information cannot be controlled, the people need to be committed before they find it. The study can be shortened. The emotional pressure can be intensified. The lessons can be skipped. And the water is what makes the rest of it permanent. That is not pastoral care. That is not a spiritual response to souls searching for meaning. That is crisis management. That is an institution choosing its own survival over the welfare of the human beings it recruits. Remember this the next time you hear the words spiritual paradise. Remember January 2026 and the skipped lessons. Remember the second paragraph of that February Watchtower, where the governing body told hesitant students that the voice saying, "Wait," was not wisdom, but weakness. Remember that the organization which has declared accurate knowledge essential for eternal life is now openly telling its teachers that the knowledge can wait, that the baptism cannot. The Norway records are public. The abuse case documents are public. The testimony of people who lost their families to shunning is more accessible right now than at any point in this organization's history. The governing body is running a race against that accessibility, against that search bar, against the 30 seconds it takes a curious person to find what the organization spent decades trying to prevent them from reading. That is the strategy. That is what January 2026 and February 2026 look like when you hold them together and ask the one question they were designed to prevent you from asking. And now you know exactly what they are running from. If you were baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, leave your story in the comments right now. How long did your study take? How many lessons did you complete? What were you never told before they put you in that water? Your story is documentation. And documentation is the one thing this organization has never found a way to shun.